It is time for something special!
On April 18, 1994, Disney made the leap from the silver screen to the Great White Way with the opening of Beauty and the Beast on Broadway. The show was nominated for 9 Tony Awards and ran for 13 years. 4 years later, Disney would produce one of the most successful musicals in Broadway history with The Lion King, which currently holds the record as the 3rd longest-running Broadway show of all time. All eyes were on Disney to see what their 3rd Broadway show would be. Would they adapt another movie from the Disney Renaissance? Or would they draw inspiration from one of their classic animated features? The answer, surprisingly, would be neither. Disney's next Broadway musical would come from the world of opera, and it would beat the odds to become a big hit. This was Disney's AIDA.
I know expectations are wild and almost beyond my fulfillment, but they won't hear a word of my doubts or see signs of weakness. My mind impassable to you see, it's clear that a boy can rekindle my ancestors' dreams. It's enough, it's enough, it's
The story of AIDA dates back 150 years, beginning as an opera composed by the legendary Giuseppe Verdi. It tells the story of AIDA, an Ethiopian princess kidnapped and enslaved by the Egyptian army. She ends up falling in love with Radames, an Egyptian military commander. AIDA and Radames feel torn between their love for each other and love for their homelands. To complicate things further, Radames is betrothed to Amneris, the daughter of the pharaoh. The opera was met with great acclaim upon its debut and quickly became a popular title with opera companies around the world, and continues to be performed to this day. In 1990, opera star Leontine Price penned a children's book based on the opera. This caught the eye of Thomas Schumacher and Peter Schneider, who were in the middle of leading Disney through a string of successful animated films that revitalized the company. They bought the rights to Price's book in hopes of turning AIDA into the next hit movie for Disney. In 1994, Disney released a cultural phenomenon with The Lion King, featuring music by Elton John and lyrics by Tim Rice. Disney was eager to work with John and Rice again, and Schumacher and Schneider thought that they might be interested in tackling AIDA. However, the songwriting duo wasn't very interested in writing songs for another animated movie so soon. As Elton John recalls, "I remember having said, 'Give us something really dangerous.' And that's when Tom and Peter presented us with the idea of doing a brand new stage AIDA." And so, work began on a new modern spin on Verdi's classic tale. Linda Wolverton was hired to write the musical's book. Disney was very familiar with Wolverton, as she had penned the screenplay for the Oscar-nominated Beauty and the Beast, and co-wrote the screenplay for The Lion King. She'd also adapted her screenplay for the Broadway adaptation of Beauty and the Beast. Working alongside Elton John and Tim Rice, the team crafted the first act of the musical and put together a cast for the first workshop in April of 1996. The show would have 2 more workshops in November of 1996 and the spring of 1997. Songs were added, removed, and rearranged. The tone of the show shifted from comical to more serious. It was clear that there was strong potential for the show, and the decision was made to mount a full production. The show, then titled Elaborate Lives, The Legend of AIDA, was set to premiere at the Alliance Theater in Atlanta, Georgia. Heather Headley was cast in the central role of AIDA. Headley had recently made her Broadway debut as Nala in the original cast of The Lion King.
And where the journey may lead me, let your prayers be my guide. I cannot stay here, my family, but I'll remember my pride.
Although Disney was familiar with Headley, she still had to audition for the role like everyone else. According to Peter Schneider, "We auditioned lots of people, and when Headley sang and acted it, you felt the chemistry in the room. You felt the star power." Headley would be joined by newcomer Hank Stratton as Radames and Sherry Renee Scott as Amneris. Scott was a Broadway veteran, having recently replaced Idina Menzel in Rent. She had been a part of AIDA since the very first reading in 1996. Elaborate Lives, The Legend of AIDA held its first public performance on September 17, 1998. The show played to packed audiences and received standing ovations every night. However, Disney was not satisfied with the show as it was. The show was rife with technical issues, primarily dealing with a very expensive mechanical pyramid that was central to the set's design. At the first preview, the pyramid broke down early in the performance, bringing the show to a halt. The cast had no choice but to perform the rest of the show concert style, singing and acting the rest of the show in a semicircle at the front of the stage. This was a blessing in disguise, according to producer Thomas Schumacher.
Well, it was a revelation to us, because we learned at that juncture that we were very moved by the music, and that in and of itself was compelling, and it got an extraordinary response. What lived with us, and certainly with Paul and Stuart and myself and Peter Schneider, was this moment of hearing that music sung and hear the cast stripped away from everything. And that really was, probably the biggest thing that happened for us in Atlanta.
When the reviews came out, Elton John and Tim Rice's music was almost universally praised, and Heather Headley received raves, but the show as a whole received mixed reviews. Disney knew they wouldn't be able to bring the show as it was in Atlanta to New York, so they went back to the drawing board. They made the difficult decision to fire most of the creative team, scrapping all of the designs that were used for the Atlanta production, including that pesky $10 million pyramid. In the year that followed the Atlanta production, Robert Falls was brought on as the director, Wayne Cilento was assigned the choreography, and Bob Crowley was hired to design both new sets and costumes. The physical production wouldn't be the only thing to change. Robert Falls was given permission to rewrite Linda Wolverton's book. Tony Award-winning playwright David Henry Hwang was hired as Falls' writing partner. Falls was determined to make the show more serious and remove some of the overtly comedic elements apparent in the Atlanta version. He also wanted to clarify the ending, which in Atlanta left audiences slightly confused about the fate of Aida and Radames. The cast was overhauled as well. Adam Pascal replaced Hank Stratton in the role of Radames. Pascal was well known in the theater world, having originated the role of Roger in the Broadway sensation Rent. The character Negan, played by the Lion King's Scott Irby Rainier, was rewritten, making the character older and renaming him Merib. Newcomer Damian Perkins was cast in the role. While work continued to prepare Aida for its Chicago engagement, Elton John and Tim Rice released a concept album of songs from the show. The album featured an impressive amount of stars, including Sting, Janet Jackson, Shania Twain, and the Spice Girls.
Elton sent the track to us. We loved it, how it was, but we did want to make it our own a little bit. So it's got a bit of a Spice Girls flavour.
Written in the Stars, performed by Elton John and Leanne Rimes, became a hit single, peaking at number 29 on Billboard's Hot 100 chart and number 2 on Billboard's Adult Contemporary chart. It was Elton John's 57th, and as of this date, last top 40 single. The revamped version of Aida began performances at the newly renovated Cadillac Palace Theater in Chicago on November 12, 1999. After the news of the technical problems of the Atlanta production had spread across the theater community, all eyes were on Disney to see if they had worked out the kinks. Unfortunately for Disney, the answer was no. On November 13th, only the second night of previews, an accident occurred that injured the show's stars, Heather Headley and Adam Pascal. At the end of the show, the actors were hoisted above the stage in a box representing the tomb that Aida and Radames are buried in. The mechanism that lifted the box in the air suddenly gave way, bringing Headley and Pascal crashing down at least 8 feet to the stage. The stars were rushed to the hospital, but luckily only suffered minor injuries. Headley and Pascal were back in the show a few days later, but the damage was already done. The press had a field day with the news of yet another Aida snafu. The production pressed ahead in Chicago. Despite the many changes made between Atlanta and Chicago, reviews were still mixed to negative from critics. The production team waited until the Chicago run was over to begin making the changes needed to get the show ready for Broadway. New songs like Fortune Favors the Brave were written, and the Act 1 closer Our Nation Holds Sway was cut and replaced by a song from the second act, The Gods Love Nubia. 3 weeks after the show wrapped up its run in Chicago, the cast and creative team reconvened in New York to prepare for Aida's Broadway debut. The show would play the Palace Theater in the heart of Times Square. The Palace was the former home of Disney's Beauty and the Beast, which moved a few blocks to the Lunt-Fontanne Theater in order to make room for Aida. Finally, after years of work and 2 rocky out-of-town tryouts, AIDA opened on Broadway on March 23, 2000.
When Beauty and the Beast opened on Broadway, a whole new generation discovered the magic of the theater. Then came The Lion King, and the theater discovered just how magical a musical can be. Now, Elton John and Tim Rice's AIDA completes the trilogy with a spectacular love story.
And then the reviews came, and the critics were less than kind. Many critics found the tone of the show to still be muddled. Some thought the show was too concerned with appealing to the younger tween crowd. Some reviewers just seemed hungry to destroy the show simply because it was a Disney musical. Bad reviews could have very well killed AIDA before it even had a chance to gain an audience, but word of mouth proved stronger than the opinions of theater critics. Audiences came in droves to see this big, splashy new Elton John musical. The cast performed constantly on daytime talk shows. AIDA seemed destined to be a hit. Critics be damned.
Tony nominee Heather Headley, the cast of AIDA. It is a wonderful show. Go see it at the Palace Theater and watch her win on Sunday night. We'll be right.
Although the negative reviews didn't seem to affect the box office, they did affect AIDA's award chances. When the 2000 Tony Awards were announced, AIDA was notably missing from the list of Best Musical nominees. The snub seemed especially purposeful, as 2 of the shows nominated, Contact and Swing, were not traditional musicals. Contact was a musical dance play that controversially featured no live music. The dancers performed to pre-recorded tracks. Swing was a jukebox musical, meaning none of the music used was original, and it featured no spoken dialogue. Although AIDA would not be eligible for the biggest award of the night, the show did receive 5 Tony nominations and won 4. Best Score for Elton John and Tim Rice, Best Lighting Design for Natasha Katz, Best Set Design for Bob Crowley, and Best Leading Actress in the Musical for Heather Headley.
And the American Theatre Wing's Tony Award goes to Heather Headley for AIDA. This is Miss Headley's first Tony Award.
2 years ago, I sat in the back of this theater with Lion King, wondering when it would be my turn to sit up here and much less be on this stage. So I have a few people to thank. First to begin, I want to thank the women in my category. I thank you so much. I've always maintained that you've been good teachers, and I thank you again tonight. I thank Disney. I could not have done this without you. I love you so much, and I'll work for you for the rest of my life.
Despite the disappointment of being snubbed for Best Musical, AIDA had the last laugh. The show ran longer than every other show that was nominated for Best Musical that year. AIDA became a bona fide hit. It was named one of Time magazine's best shows for the year 2000. The show's cast album won the Grammy Award for Best Musical Theater Album, and it managed to survive the economic slump following the 9/11 terrorist attacks.
It's up to you, New York.
Come to New York and let's go on with the show.
Over the course of its run, multiple R&B stars would step into the role of AIDA, including Grammy Award winner Toni Braxton, Destiny's Child's Michelle Williams, and Deborah Cox, who would be the show's final AIDA. Cox would also release a dance club remix of the song Easy as Life. In a neat twist, Idina Menzel took over for Sherry Renee Scott after Scott left the show. Scott had taken over for Menzel in Rent a few years prior. This marked Menzel's first time working with Disney, 12 years before she'd let it go as Queen Elsa in Frozen. AIDA's Broadway run came to a close on September 5, 2004, after 1,852 performances. It currently sits at number 40 on the list of the longest-running Broadway shows of all time. No Broadway show that has played the Palace Theater since has run as long as AIDA. A film version was rumored to be in the early stages of development, with Beyoncé Knowles set to play AIDA and Christina Aguilera as Amneris, but unfortunately, nothing ever came of it. Once the show was available to license, AIDA became a staple amongst high school, community, and regional theaters around the world. AIDA was Disney's not-so-little Broadway show that could. The cast and creative team faced the odds and beat them, even though the press and critics seemed determined to bring them down. AIDA ran longer than other Disney on Broadway productions, including Tarzan, The Little Mermaid, Newsies, and even Frozen. In January 2020, it was announced that a revival of AIDA, directed by original cast member Shelley Williams, would premiere at Paper Mill Playhouse before embarking on the national tour in 2021 with hopes of returning to Broadway. However, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the U.S. production has been postponed. The Williams-helmed version of AIDA will now premiere in Germany in 2022. If the revival is successful, we could very well see Disney's Nubian princess lighting up the Great White Way once again.